Welcome to this class, which is a continuation of the history of the English language and literature. In our class earlier, we took up the first half, the history of English language. In the class today, we are going to concentrate on the history of English literature. So this is part 2 of the lesson from the last class. We will first look at the age of Chaucer. Before the age of Chaucer, there is Old English, but there is not much work happening in Old English. There was still something being written. There are certain writings, there are certain anonymous authors, but we are not touching it. We are starting our discussion with the 14th century, which is the age of Chaucer. A quick look at the background to the 14th century is presented on your screens. This is the period which was ruled by 3 different kings, Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV. This is also the period of the 100 Years' War. This is the period of the plague or the Black Death. This was the time, basically because of a result of the plague, the peasants' revolt took place. There was a lot of corruption in the church, which prompted John Wycliffe to introduce religious reform. John Wycliffe, remember, also translated the Bible into English. Some of the important writers of this period are William Langland, John Gower, and Geoffrey Chaucer. For the purposes of our study, we will be looking at Geoffrey Chaucer. On your screen, you see certain important aspects of the age of Chaucer. We will see some more in the next slide. This was the age in which there was increasing disillusionment with the papal authority. Because of the interference of the church in matters of state, it was felt that this is leading to a kind of intolerance. There was a critique of established order and religion in society. Because of the 100 Years' War that took place between England and France, there was an increasing sense of nationalism among the English people. This was also the age of the rise of the middle class as a result of the peasants' revolt. I told you a little while ago, based on the previous slide, that the plague, also referred to as the Black Death, had a significant impact on society. About language, part of it we have already looked in the last class. There is increasing influence of the Celtic, Scandinavian, and Latin languages. You find more influence of French, but again, comparatively speaking, there is lesser influence of Latin and French and more use of English. And we also find that the English language begins to be standardized. This was basically the age of poetry. Poetry gained importance, and the kind of poetry that was written in the age of Chaucer is basically narrative and descriptive poetry, mostly revolving around secular themes. Important writers, as I told you a little while ago, Chaucer, Gower, Langland, and Wycliffe. Chaucer introduced the Chaucerian stanza, which is a stanza of 7 lines. The rhyme scheme is given there, A, B, A, B, 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 C, C. This is called the Chaucerian rhyme. If you get any question on Chaucer or Chaucerian poetry or on the Canterbury Tales, you can use these points. We also find the use of humor and pathos, especially in the poetry of Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer, this is the author who is important in the 14th century. There is a spelling mistake in the second bullet point. Chaucer lived between 1340 to 1400. He is considered to be the representative poet of the 14th century, and he is also called the father of the English poetry. A very common statement about Chaucer is that he found English of brick but left it of marble, meaning the English language was not refined, but Chaucer brought a refinement to the English language through his poetry. Some of the works by Geoffrey Chaucer are The Romance of the Rose, Troilus and Cressida, and the Canterbury Tales. For the purpose of our class, we will look a little bit more on the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is a work by Geoffrey Chaucer, basically written in verse. It is a reflection of 14th century English society. It is a collection of 24 tales on various themes. The initial plan of Chaucer was to have 4 tales by each of the pilgrims. I should tell you the background. The Canterbury Tales has this background. There is a group of pilgrims who are on their way to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury. On their way, these pilgrims stop at an inn. The innkeeper also plans to proceed on the pilgrimage. So when they meet at the inn, they come up with a plan initiated by the innkeeper to while away the time, to spend the time more fruitfully. It is decided that each one of these pilgrims, and there are about 30 pilgrims, each of these pilgrims will narrate 2 tales on their way to Canterbury to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. On the return journey, these about 30 pilgrims will once again narrate 2 tales each. But that plan remained incomplete, and Canterbury Tales, which is written in fragments, now has 24 poetic tales available to us. So that is the background. Now each of these tales are narrated by the different characters, and these characters are not presented to us by their name. We don't know the names of the characters. They are represented by their profession or by their title. For example, knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, knight, nun, miller. So throughout the poem you will have reference to the knight, to the nun, to the miller, to this, to that, but never by their own original names. So these tales or these characters represent not just the person telling the tale, but also the profession, the group that they belong to. So these tales represent the characters and also their social or religious class. As I told you, there is good use of humor and irony. So we find good use of humor, of irony, wit and humor in the Canterbury Tales. And because this is set in the 14th century, it is written in Middle English. This is the language that is used. In the class earlier, I told you that it is almost impossible for us to read Old English and understand it. To read Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English is also an extremely difficult task. Most of the time, we need a transliteration in modern English to understand what the Canterbury Tales is all about. I have changed the slide. From 14th century, we moved to the 5th century. Hardly anything happened here compared to the literary output of the 14th century of the period of Chaucer. There is not much. There are a few writers. La Mort the author is a famous work by Sir Thomas Valery. 3 other names are mentioned on your screen. Not much to discuss about the 15th century. 16th century onwards, we have important things happening. Apart from Renaissance is revival, rebirth. There was once again a revival. I've got the spelling wrong. I'm sorry. It is R-E-V-I-V-A-L, revival or rebirth. We also have the Elizabethan age in English literature. Generally, this is referred to as the period spanning from 1558 to 1525. By and large, it covers the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth ruled over England between 1558 to 1603. So the entire period during her reign is collectively referred to as the Elizabethan age. This is the age of poetry. This is the age of drama. This is the age of a lot of literary output. In drama, you have some names reflected on your screens. You can see Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Robert Greene, Thomas Kidd. These are the dramatists. On the right hand side, you have sample titles of plays written by them. One example of a play written by Christopher Marlowe is Dr. Faustus. Some examples of plays written by William Shakespeare are given there, but only 4. And all these 4 are tragedies. They are referred to as the major tragedies: Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, King Lear. Ben Jonson, The Alchemist, Robert Greene's Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay, and Kidd's The Spanish Tragedy. If we were to look at the Elizabethan drama, we need to understand that it was not exclusively devoted to any one type. This genre can be broadly divided into tragedies, comedies, historical plays, and tragicomedies. For example, I have used plays by William Shakespeare exclusively because William Shakespeare completely dominates the Elizabethan drama. The first 4 titles that you see on your screen under the heading tragedies are the great tragedies by William Shakespeare: Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Othello. Romeo and Juliet is also a tragedy, but it does not constitute one of the great tragedies. And another difference between Romeo and Juliet and the other 4 is that Romeo and Juliet are commoners. They are not rulers. They don't belong to the high class of society. So that is the major difference between Romeo and Juliet and the others. There are slight differences in the kind of tragedy or in the kind of drama that Shakespeare wrote to the classical drama, especially drama as propounded by Aristotle. Aristotle talked about tragedy and he laid down certain rules. Tragedy is supposed to be written in 5 acts. Shakespeare follows that pattern, and his tragedies are also divided into 5 acts. They are constructed in the form of a pyramid. The rising action climax to the falling action. So that pyramidical structure is also followed by Shakespeare. Aristotle talks about the 3 unities of time, place, and action. Shakespeare does not follow the 3 unities of time, place, and action. Aristotle proposed that the scene should not shift, the place should remain the same, there should be unity of place, there should be unity of time. So most of the classical drama revolve around a time period of 24 hours. There should be unity of action. Shakespeare felt that more than the unities of time, place, and action, I'm sorry, give me a minute. Okay, so Shakespeare did not follow the 3 unities as laid down by Now, let us move to the comedies. The comedies that Shakespeare wrote are referred to as romantic comedies. Here again, we find some difference. In the comedies written by Shakespeare, we have the women characters generally donning an important role. There is also a situation of mixed identity or identity crisis, or where we do not understand who is who. This is generally because of disguise. The characters take on disguises, or we have a situation of twins. The brother and the sister are presented as twins, then they get separated. Then the twin sister dresses up like a man, and there is a lot of confusion. So it is basically comedy of errors that we find. In his comedies, we also find apart from this major element of romance, there is also a subplot. In Shakespeare's tragedies also we find the use of a subplot. In King Lear, for example, when we talk about King Lear and his 3 daughters, there is also the subplot where we talk about the Earl of Gloucester and his sons. Shakespeare also wrote historical plays. I'm sorry for the break. Let me go back. Shakespeare wrote tragedies, comedies, historical plays, and tragicomedies. His historical plays are many. A few are reflected on your screens: Henry V, Richard III, and Julius Caesar. Shakespeare also blended tragedies and comedies. As per the classical rules, there cannot be a blend of the tragic and the comic. But Shakespeare did write a number of plays where we have a combination of both tragedy as well as comedy. Two sample plays are given there on your screens. Apart from drama, Elizabethan age is also very significant for poetry. There are 3 poets and 1 sample work given there on your screens. First 2 bullet points. Sir Philip Sidney wrote Astrophil and Stella. Edmund Spenser wrote The Fairy Queen. William Shakespeare produced a number of sonnets. His plays also contain a number of songs. We'll look more at these a little while later. You will talk about Sir Philip Sidney in a later slide when we talk about prose in the Elizabethan age. In English poetry, one important aspect is the introduction of the English sonnet. The English sonnet is also referred to as the Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespeare did not introduce it. He popularized the use of the English sonnet. Excuse me. Give me a minute. I am told that the slides are not changing. Just a minute. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just informed that the slides are not changing. The slides did not change. So what I'm doing is, you did hear what I was saying, but you could not see the slides. So what I will now do is, I will go back to the slides and run the slides quickly, and then come to the slide where I had stopped. Okay. This was my first slide, the title slide. Then we talked about the age of Chaucer. We talked about the background. From there, we looked at the age of Chaucer. Some of the major features are there on the slide for you to see. Then we moved specifically to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer. We discussed how Geoffrey Chaucer is a representative poet of the 14th century, how he is called the father of the English poetry. These are his works. The last 3 are works by Geoffrey Chaucer. Then we talked about Canterbury Tales. This is the most important work by Geoffrey Chaucer. On your screen, you can see the important points listed there. It is a representative poem of the 14th century English society. There are a total of 24 tales presented there. The background is that we have a set of pilgrims who are on their way to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury. The characters are not named. They are referred to by their professional name or title, as you can see on your slides now: Knight, Nun, Miller. There is use of irony, humor, and wit. And because this is a 14th century work, it is obviously written in Middle English. Then I said that the 15th century, when compared to the 14th century and the later centuries, is very unproductive. There is not much happening here. one important work is depicted there, the Maudhyatha. This is an important period, and the periods that follow now are all important. Renaissance means revival. It is the revival or rebirth of learning. The Elizabethan age broadly falls under this period, but it covers the entire reign of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth ruled over England between 1558 to 1603. So we can consider this also as the period of English literature, and the later period from here to the Restoration can be referred to as the Puritan age. In the later slide, we'll talk about the Puritan age. About Elizabethan drama, you have some dramatists listed there. I have listed 5 names here and 1 or 2 representative works by these dramatists on the right hand side. Then, as I'd already told you, in this age we have a great flowering of drama as well as poetry. We look specifically at Elizabethan drama, and for example, I have concentrated only on Shakespeare because Elizabethan drama is rich in various plays written by Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote tragedies, comedies, historical plays, tragicomedies. Some examples for each of the categories are given on your screens. I think I had stopped here, if I remember right. Then we moved on to talk about Elizabethan poetry. This is an age that is rich in poetry, again more because of Shakespeare's contribution, but Fairy Queen, Sir Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella are also important works. As I told you, we'll refer to Sir Philip Sidney a little later when we talk about prose, and we'll concentrate more on Shakespeare and the sonnets, especially the English sonnet. Now, the English sonnet is also referred to as the Shakespearean sonnet because Shakespeare made extensive use of the English sonnet. English poetry is of different types, is of different forms. There is lyric, there is ode, there is elegy, there is epic, there is sonnet, there is ballad, etc. In this period, we have the English sonnet. The English sonnet was introduced by Sir Thomas White. It is written in a very specific format. It is a short poem of 14 lines. This short poem of 14 lines is divided into 4 parts. There are 3 quatrains. A quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines, and a couplet, as the word indicates, is a stanza of 2 lines. So an English sonnet or a Shakespearean sonnet is a poem written in 14 lines. It is divided into 4 parts. The first 3 parts are quatrains of 4 lines each, and the last part is a couplet of 2 lines. The rhyme scheme of an English sonnet or a Shakespearean sonnet is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. To understand rhyme scheme, I'll take you to the next slide. But before we go to the next slide, let us look at the first bullet point here. An English sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. What is iambic pentameter? An iambic pentameter is a line of 10 syllables with each foot containing an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. I'll explain to you when I go to the next slide with an example sonnet. To divide this further, to divide iambic and pentameter further, what do we understand by iamb? An iamb is a foot. It is a pair of an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable. Penta refers to 5. So there are 5 feet, each foot containing 2 syllables. the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. In English, a word is divided into syllables. Each syllable contains a vowel. It is important that there should be a vowel in a syllable. There may be certain words that have only one syllable. You cannot divide them further, or there may be words which can be divided further. So in iambic pentameter, we look at a line, divide the line not by words but by the number of syllables. So it is important that the sonnet should have 10 syllables in each line, and these 10 syllables should be in pairs of 5. Each foot should have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So let me quickly repeat what an iambic, let me quickly repeat to you what I mean by, one second, a sonnet. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines written in iambic pentameter. An iambic pentameter is a line of 10 syllables with each foot containing an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So far, this definition of sonnet is common to any sonnet. Now, sonnets are majorly of two types, the English sonnet and the Petrarchan sonnet. On your slide, what you see is a further description of the English sonnet. So, I repeat, an English sonnet is a poem of 14 lines written in iambic pentameter. Each line contains 10 syllables containing an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable in each foot. It is divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet. Each quatrain contains 4 lines and the couplet contains 2 lines. In each of the 3 quatrains, the poet presents an idea, an image or a theme, and in the couplet, the poet tries to sum up or conclude whatever he has been saying in the first 3 quatrains. The rhyme scheme of the English sonnet, the rhyme scheme of the Petrarchan sonnet will not be the same. The rhyme scheme of the English sonnet is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. Now let me take you to the sample slide. On this slide, let me increase the font. On this slide, we have an example from a sonnet by Shakespeare, sonnet number 116. It can also be referred to by the first line, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds." Let me read the poem quickly. As I am reading, pay attention to the last words, minds, love, finds, remove. Okay? So I'll read, your concentration will be on the last words of each of the lines, visually also and also artistically. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is a never fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bar whose words are known, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, the rosy lips and cheeks within his bedding sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Let me take you to the last words first to help you understand the rhyme scheme. Look at the last word here of the first line, minds. Minds rhymes with the last word of the third line, minds, finds. You don't find any other rhyming word at the end. Love rhymes with remove, love, remove, end sound is the same. So if minds sound, end sound is represented by A, you find the same sound in finds. Love is not the same as mind, so we'll give it the next letter B. A, B, A, B. Okay, got it? If you can look at the previous slide, the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, meaning the last word of the first line rhymes with the last word of the third line, The last word of the second line rhymes with the last word of the fourth line. The last word of the fifth line rhymes with the last word of the seventh line. So there is alternate rhyme for each quatrain. Got it? Let's go back to the slide. Ma, ba, shaken, taken. Look at only the end sound. Cheeks, weeks, come, doom, proved, loved. These two match. So we have the last ones, GG. Same rhyme in the couplet, GG. Okay. Now let us take a look at, excuse me. Now let us take a look at Elizabethan prose. I told you when we looked at Sir Philip Sidney with the example Astrophil and Stella as one of his contributions to English poetry, this is his contribution to prose. This is a piece of criticism. You will read more of this in your later semesters. Defense of poetry or defense of poesy. Francis Bacon is also a famous essayist of this period. One of his works is titled The Advancement of Learning. We'll know more about Bacon. Francis Bacon is referred to as the father of the English essay. Remember we said Chaucer is considered to be the father of English poetry? Yes, so now Bacon is considered to be the father of the English essay. He wrote very short essays. The style is very aphoristic, very didactic. He used triple sentence construction. Most of the sentences are very short and pithy. In the class today, I do not have an example sentence to give you, but in your next semester, you have a course devoted to the English essay. You will read more about Francis Bacon and his style of essays in the next semester. Around the same time, we also have a group of poets who were writing poetry which is not similar to the kind of poetry that was written by, say, William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, or Sir Philip Sidney. This is a completely different style of poetry. The major proponents of the metaphysical poetry are, you can see on your screen, John Donne, Andrew Marvell, George Herbert. Crashaw and Vaughan also wrote metaphysical poetry. One example poem by each of these three poets is given on your slide. The Sun Rising by John Donne. He also wrote Valediction Forbidding Mourning. That is also a very famous poem by him. Andrew Marvell, To His Coy Mistress, The Garden. George Herbert, The Pulley. Some characteristics of metaphysical poetry are given there on your slide. In the next slide, you will read something more. So we have the use of a conceit, hyperbole in metaphysical poetry. A hyperbole is an exaggerated statement. For the lover in The Sun Rising, the lover, the beloved, and the room encompass the entire world. So the speaker tells the sun, why do you have to go around the whole of the earth? Just go around our room and your duty is done. That is a hyperbole, an exaggerated statement. Conceit. A conceit is a comparison like a simile or a metaphor, but it is very, very jarring. It is two disjointed elements brought together. I'll give you an example of a conceit. In one of the poems, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, the speaker there, the lover, is talking to his beloved. He is going on a journey. The beloved is crying. He tells her not to cry, and he compares the lovers to a pair of compasses, a mathematical instrument. He says that the beloved, the woman, is like the fixed point. It remains fixed in one place. The lover goes round like the other point in which we insert the pencil. However far he may go, eventually he comes back, and both of them are joined together at one point on the top. So this is a very, very jarring comparison. It is an example of a conceit. Metaphysical poetry has a very abrupt beginning. In The Sun Rising, John Donne says, busy old fool. The sun is referred to as the busy old fool. There is a direct address. The language is very colloquial. The imagery that is drawn is generally from the field of science and geography, because this was the age of scientific and geographic advancement. More information about metaphysical poetry is given there. Some points are already explained there. As I told you, it is an abrupt opening. It has an abrupt opening. There is a direct address, and the style is very colloquial. It is as if there are two people talking to one another. We find the use of conceit, paradox, and hyperboles. Each of the terms are explained there. A conceit is an ingenious and clever comparison between two seemingly dissimilar things. A paradox is a seemingly contradictory but well-founded statement. And we have extensive use of hyperboles, which are exaggerated statements. There is great use of figurative language, and the tone is very philosophical. The imagery, as I told you, is generally drawn from the scientific and the geographic world. Now, as we move further, we come to the Puritan age. When we were talking about the Elizabethan age, I told you that the rule of Queen Elizabeth ended in the year 1603. Drama, which had a lot of patronage during the Queen's period, began to lose the patronage. This was the age of Puritanism, where there was a surge of religious fervor, and drama was considered immoral, and there was a period when drama was completely banned and theatres were closed down. This was the age in which John Milton flourished. But though there is not much happening in the area of drama, Puritan age is an important age in the history of English literature, because after Shakespeare, one of the greatest writers of English literature, John Milton, lived during this age, and he produced the two great epics, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Apart from the two epics, he also wrote sonnets. He wrote sonnets in the Petrarchan style, not in the style of the English sonnet. He also wrote pastoral elegy. Lycidas is a very good example of a pastoral elegy. A play written by John Milton is Samson Agonistes. There are also some prose works by Milton. He wrote tracts and pamphlets also. In the study of Milton and the Puritan age, Paradise Lost has an important place. When you come to the next semester, you will read more about Paradise Lost, because one of the books of Paradise Lost, book 9, is prescribed for your study. You will read more about an epic, how it is a long narrative poem, how it begins in the middle of action, how it encompasses a vast area. There are many features of an epic that we will discuss when we come to the next semester. For now, let us move to the next age, the age of Restoration. Again, an important age. After the Puritan age, where there was a lot of Puritanism, we find that the King of England was sent into exile. But with the Restoration, we find that Charles II is restored to the throne of England in 1660. Cromwell's period, the period of Puritanism, ends, and we have a new age in the history of English literature, that is the age of Restoration. This is the age in which more importance is given to reason, to method, to conformity of rules. There is another slide on this. We find a lot of influence of the classical writers, because these writers felt that they should draw their inspiration from the classical writers. Because Charles II lived in France for a long period of time, we find the influence of French literature, especially on comedy. They gave a lot of importance to form and to rules. Satire became more predominant in this age. The use of heroic couplet was also important in the age of the Restoration. The Restoration, there is a spelling error. Restoration, excuse me. Okay, Restoration comedy, also referred to as the comedy of manners, and we have the heroic play, also referred to as the Restoration tragedy. Now you see more features of the neoclassical. This is with specific reference to poetry, but it is common to the entire age. There is a strict adherence to rules. The writers gave a lot of importance to realism. There was no scope for imagination. Most of their writings were didactic. They did not believe in art for art's sake. There is a lot of use of scholarly allusions. We find the use of scholarly allusions in the works of Milton also. The heroic couplet is introduced here. There is a great use of satire. There is more and more objectivity, and reason, as I told you, gains more importance over imagination. Some of the important Restoration writers and sample works are given there on your slide. John Dryden, who wrote Macfreckno, it is a poem, it is a satire. Aurangzeb and Tyrannic Love are his heroic tragedies or Restoration tragedies. Tyrannic Love is considered to be one of his greatest heroic tragedies. Alexander Pope's poem, An Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot, is given there on your screen. Another short poem popularly prescribed for students is The Rape of the Lock. Then we have, it is a mock epic. William Wycherley wrote a play, The Country Wife. George Etheridge, The Man of More, The Comical Revenge. And William Congreve, famous as a writer of Restoration comedy, wrote The Way of the World. As we move further, we come to the periodical essay. This is the period where we have two major writers, Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. We also have the introduction of periodicals. These are newspapers or magazines that were printed, and we have more and more people getting into prose. There is a shift from poetry towards essay. So the Tatler and the Spectators were periodical publications in which not just Joseph Addison and Richard Steele, but other writers also contributed short essays. The basic purpose of Richard Steele and Joseph Addison in introducing the Spectator and Tatler and in writing the periodical essays was to bring about reform in society through the use of gentle wit and irony. One of the characters that was introduced by Richard Steele in his periodical essays is Sir Roger. In your next semester, you will have, as I told you, an exclusive course on the English essay. When we study that course, we will read more in detail about the periodical essay, the contribution of Addison and Steele, and we will also read one prescribed periodical essay. In the history of the English literature, the English novel plays a very important role. What you see on your screen, this is not comprehensive, exhaustive. This is just a sample piece given there. We have novelists of the 17th and the 18th century. Daniel Defoe, famous for Robinson Crusoe. Most of you might have read some of these works. They are very, very commonly read works, very popular also. Samuel Richardson wrote Pamela in the form of an epistolary novel, a novel written in the form of exchange of letters. Henry Fielding wrote Tom Jones, Joseph Andrews. These are picaresque novels. Horace Walpole wrote The Castle of Otranto, an example of the Gothic novel. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is famous for its satire. It is divided into 4 books. Most of you must have read about Lilliputs as small children. It is a part of Gulliver's Travels. Another major period in the history of English literature is the Romantic Age. This is basically the age of poetry. 2 important events that mark the beginning of the Romantic Age are the French Revolution. We can say that the Romantic Age was introduced into English literature with the French Revolution, which broke out in 1789, or to be more specific, we can say that the lyrical ballad, the lyrical ballads is the collection of poems by William Wordsworth and Coleridge. So we can say that the Romantic Age in English literature was ushered with the publication of the lyrical ballads in 1798 by William Wordsworth and Samuel T. Coleridge. A few other romantic poets are given there on your screen: Byron, Shelley, Keats. What are the characteristics of the romantic literature or of the romantic age or romantic poetry? The romantic writers gave more importance to the individual. There was more importance to imagination than to reason. It is the almost opposite of the neoclassical age. There is use of simple diction. The writers felt that if the poet experiences emotions that are common to the people, then the language used should also be common to the people. The lyric was used extensively: ballad, ode. These are all the popular forms of poems used in the Romantic age. There is extensive use of the autobiographical element, so we find a lot of subjectivity here, unlike being objective in the previous age. Nature plays a very important role in romantic literature. All romantic writers draw their inspiration from nature, and their imagery is also drawn from nature. Some features of romantic poetry are listed there. Some of the points have already been discussed in the previous slides. There is importance of imagination over reason. There is importance given to the individual over society. There is spontaneity of thought and emotion. In fact, Wordsworth defines poetry as a spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility. We find a great influence of nature. There is use of nature imagery. Lyric, ballad, and folk poetry, odes are commonly used here. Common themes are drawn from everyday life in their poetry. The diction, the choice of words is very simple, very easy to understand. Some of you might have already read poems by Wordsworth in school. Daffodils, for example. It is a poem very commonly prescribed at the school or early college levels. There is a lot of importance given to emotions and feelings. The writers believed in art for art's sake. They do not believe in didacticism. Their purpose is not to teach the reader anything. We find the use of the supernatural element, especially in the poetry of Coleridge, Kubla Khan, for example, or in Keats's The Ancient Mariner. So it is more subjective than objective. Emotions are given, or feelings are given, more importance over reason. And because this was also the time of the French Revolution, there is a great emphasis on the freedom of man. Because they believed in freedom, they also believed in the freedom of the poet to use whatever form he wants to, whatever choice of words he wants to use. Oh, okay, I think this slide got repeated. Now we move to the Victorian age. The important writers of the Victorian age are given there on your screens, and this is again not an exhaustive list. I have just used 5 sample authors and their works. Alfred Lord Tennyson, famous for his poem In Memoriam, also wrote a poem named Ulysses. In Memoriam is a long poem mourning the death of his friend Arthur Hallam. Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach is a poem in the form of a dramatic monologue. It talks about the rift between science and religion that was predominant in the Victorian age. We have Robert Browning and a number of his dramatic monologues in this age: My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover, The Last Ride Together. These are some examples of dramatic monologues written by Robert Browning. We'll read more about dramatic monologues in another slide. We also have novels being written in the Victorian age. Several novels were written during this age. 2 authors, novelists are mentioned there: Charles Dickens, who wrote Great Expectations and Hard Times, among other novels. Thomas Hardy's Test of the D'Urbervilles is given there and as an example for you. Before we proceed further, let us look at what do we mean by a dramatic monologue. In the Victorian age, we find extensive use of the dramatic monologue, more by Robert Browning, but we also find Matthew Arnold and Tennyson also writing dramatic monologues. Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach is an example of a dramatic monologue. Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Ulysses is also an example of a dramatic monologue. Robert Browning wrote several dramatic monologues. Three are mentioned there on your screen. A dramatic monologue is a poem in which there is a direct address to the reader. It is a speech by a single speaker, hence a monologue. It is dramatic because there are several elements of drama in that short speech. There is a silent audience. We only hear the speaker. Through the speaker, we know the presence of the other people around. From whatever the speaker tells us, we learn about the setting, we know what the situation is, we know about the scene. So everything is revealed through one monologue, through the single speech of one person. Now, the history of English literature ends with the modern age. We are now in the contemporary age. The important writers of the modern age are presented on your screens. We have T.S. Eliot. I have used a poem by T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. He also wrote a play, Murder in the Cathedral, an important play by him. James Joyce's novel, Ulysses. Tennyson wrote a poem named Ulysses. James Joyce wrote a novel named Ulysses. Virginia Woolf wrote non-fiction and fiction. Mrs. Dalloway is an example of her novel. George Bernard Shaw, a famous modern age dramatist, wrote several plays. One example is given on your screen. The Apple Cart, Major Barbara is another example. D.H. Lawrence also wrote many novels. Sons and Lovers is one of the examples. The time is over. I'll quickly try to conclude this, but we will not end the class. I will open the class for discussion. If you have anything important to discuss with me, we can stay on for another 20 minutes and discuss. Specifically about poetry, but you will find these points in modern literature per se. We have the use of imagism influenced by Hume, who advocated use of free verse. The term imagism is coined by Ezra Pound, a fellow poet living around the time of T.S. Eliot. Yeats fits the link between the Victorian and the modern poets. This is the age of the World War I, World War II. So we find a lot of turmoil going on in society. There is a lot of fragmentation. There is a lot of unrest. There is a lot of loss of hope. All of this gets reflected in the modern age literature. With this, I'll end the class for today.